Hey, everybody. Welcome to An Attorney and Accountant Walk Into a Bar. I'm John. I'm the attorney, and my buddy here.
I'm Kent, and I'm the accountant.
What are we going to talk about today, Kent?
We're going to talk about what is old is new, modern-day hieroglyphics, the emoji.
And its impact on the law and accounting.
Let's get into it.
So, Kent, really, really interesting thing came up. I kind of got hit with this thing that's like this Bed Bath & Beyond investor. So he's not even an officer. Name's Cohen. Tweets out this emoji of a sideways moon. And
everyone knows what that means.
Nobody knows what that means, which is the problem with these things.
Yeah.
But somehow or another, investors claim that meant that he was saying that the stock was going to the moon.
Ah.
And therefore, it was a representation that this stock was going to increase in value. Now, Mr. Cohen promptly sold all of his shares at a profit, and then everyone else took a bath because we all know what happened to Bed Bath & Beyond. Now, they're suing Mr. Cohen over this emoji, and the federal court said, yeah, that could possibly be a misrepresentation. Interesting, huh?
Yeah. To me, it really demarcates almost a retro going back into the way we communicate. If we think about hieroglyphics or old cave paintings, we used to communicate by these signals and symbols, and then we got into the wired world of telegraph and telephone, and then the wireless world of cell phones and satellite signals. And it seems more and more, if you receive a phone call, that's got to be an emergency from someone that's calling you, especially if they call you a few times in a row. That's someone's dying. And then otherwise people want texts, and text used to be the way to go. But if we rewind just a little bit, it was the beeper. When you were beeping, you'd send people, number coded messages back. And then now I receive even from my close family and friends, emojis, thumbs up, happy face, sad face. And sometimes the conversation is just characters. And it is a way of communication.
Well, you know why this one kind of got me, and I thought we ought to start talking about it, because I started thinking about all the implications of this. And one of them is, it kind of is a personal one for me, and it happens to do with how my team communicates. So whenever oftentimes when I say to someone, hey, perform this task or send this email or follow up on this, they'll respond to me with a thumbs up emoji. Now, but if you look at what the interpretation is in the software, it means that you approve, right? But that's not always what they mean. So, I might say something like, hey, our client it's been our client for 30 years, just died, and now we need to look into their estate, or I want you to write this letter. And then I get this thumbs up. It's like, are you happy that the client died? It's not really, it doesn't really fit the term. But what they mean is, yes, sir, I'm on it.
Yeah.
But that's not what the actual emoji says it means in the lexicon that's in the software. So that, it kind of struck me at that point.
I think you hit a really interesting point, because there's a stark difference, I think, between the professional environment and the use of this emoji, a personal, more private environment, and the use of emojis. So if you were to say have it with a close group of friends versus professionally, there's certain emojis, one, you avoid. Many people know in work, never send the peach or the eggplant. There's no place for those two.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
This is going to be a rabbit hole of Urban Dictionary, John, for yourself. For the viewers.
Fill me in, young man.
Don't worry, for the viewers, we'll post those just in case. And hopefully that's not thought of as, maybe we'll need to blur part of that emoji out. It's maybe that explicit. Oh, yeah, John.
Eggplant?
Once you
okay, what the hell, man? What can an eggplant mean?
So it's we'll call it's a phallic symbol. That's right.
That's a weird looking phallus. I'm thinking of like an Italian eggplant.
Yeah. Yeah, it's it's
So you're
demarcated
talking
by.
about an Asian eggplant? That's
Are you going a little wide for that?
okay. Sorry. I,
But we digress. But that's kind of the whole
I
point.
don't know.
The whole point is
I don't
that
even know what you're talking about.
the whole point is that in context between professional and private environments, they have different they're different connotations. The thumbs up, like you said, sometimes, and all of it's also driven by the software we use. If you're on Android or if you're on, for example, Apple, the emojis that are within those platforms are also different,
Yeah.
which means there can be a lost in translation moment. And not to mention, there's cultural differences. There are linguistic differences. So if you're in the North or the East or the West Coast or the South in our country, language differs, right? The local jargon differs. And then all of a sudden, of course, the use of emojis should and also differ. So that just means that the sideways moon could mean we're going to the moon, or it could be he's sleepy. So I don't know who mounted his defense, but it sure wasn't you.
Well, thank you, Ken. You're very kind. Well, we don't know, though. That's the answer. So
Yeah.
it hasn't gone to trial yet. We don't know. What we do know is that the court has said, and the Court of Appeals agreed, apparently, that the lawsuit can proceed. So what it
Interesting.
does mean is that we have to determine what that means, and a jury is going to have to figure that out probably,
Yeah.
what he meant by that. And of course, there'll be other issues as to whether people were defrauded and that sort of thing. So, and to look into this stuff, I mean, cultural differences is really, really important. Like one that I found out is a smiley face. I mean, this is like the most innocuous one. I see this one
Yeah.
every freaking day. In China, that's sarcastic.
No kidding.
No kidding.
Smiley face. Now there's upside down smiley face, which in some contexts mean yes, but kind of weirded out or awkward. There's an awkward face that, according to Urban Dictionary, means that someone is either aroused or annoyed. And so really it's about, and also not only that, there's groups. When you group together emojis, right, they create the subtext of a sentence or to craft an idea. That's an
Right.
entire.
So there's a case that's perfect because there's
Okay.
a case that I want to talk about. This was actually in the United Kingdom, I believe, where a series of emojis, a champagne bottle, a shooting star, and I believe there was one other I can't quite remember, but I'm sure they'll throw it up on the screen for you, was assent to a contract to lease a apartment, and the person who sent the emoji was held liable
Really?
for breach of contract. That was some sort of acceptance. A series of emojis was an acceptance of a contract, if you can believe that.
And that actually went through?
Yes, they were actually held liable. It was actually done and done.
Holy smokes.
Thankfully not here in the United States.
The presence of this is wide reaching, and not just in law, but also if you think about transactions from an accounting standpoint, what starts to come to mind is during the time when I was acquiring my CPA license, you had to get some level of audit hours. So even though my history and mainstay is area of expertise is tax and tax planning, in the audit world, you're privy to privileged information, especially if you're aggregating someone's 10K and you have an annual report. You know how the business is performing before the numbers hit the street. And so imagine there were a lot of restrictive rules where you couldn't communicate to outside parties clearly because you don't want to be able to have insider trading, which is probably what caught our good friend Martha. And imagine someone asking, how's X company doing? And then an emoji arises, right? Some codification of emojis that could be also demonified as insider trading, which is insane, especially in personal conversations when no intention was involved.
Well, don't think that's not happening though, where people are actually using emojis to like do some sort of insider code or something like that. But I think the reason I wanted to talk to our listeners about this is because, TACSIS, we're all about our clients and we're about making our clients feel protected, right,
Mm-hmm.
and heard, of course. And so I thought to think about this. Well, what are the liabilities? What are the potentials, right? And and you look at this stuff and you don't even know what it means. Like one of the ones that I looked up was the face blowing steam from nose, right?
Okay.
And apparently most people think that means that there's anger or frustration,
Sure.
which is how I would interpret it.
Yeah.
Well, the actual real interpretation of the emoji, or how it was originally intended, was to depict triumph and pride.
Steam from nose is triumph than pride.
That's the original definition. Yeah, what's that?
What culture is that from?
I don't know.
You know, when I feel triumph and pride, though, I'll have to record myself. Maybe some steam comes out the nostrils. Yeah.
Well, another one's like, this person bowing, right? I'm sure you've seen that one.
Sure.
Well, so that's supposed to mean reverence, right? But it could also be sarcastic. People think it might, be banging their head on the table. It's another way that that's interpreted.
Yeah.
So you have these emojis and how they are originally intended and the definitions of them, and then you have the cultural interpretations, right? So I got to thinking about it. It's like, well, what about harassment? Especially here in California, because we have a very, very broad definition of harassment. So you have a lot of federal laws and you have a lot of state laws.
Mm-hmm.
Broadly, I'm sure we all know that race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, and now gender identity, these are all protected classes of people, right? And so if there's any kind of discrimination based on those things or harassment based on those things, that you can have a lawsuit over that, right? And I think the really important thing for employers to understand is if it's a supervisor doing it, strictly liable.
You know, what's interesting is now I want to talk about place or context, because as we represent a lot of owners and entrepreneurs that have companies, and they don't have that detailed amount of control over their employees. If it happens outside of work, but they are co-workers, is it a liability of the entity that employed them? If it's something that started outside of work, say at a remiss happy hour, which is by the way why we don't have happy hours around here, because every hour is happy hour. Just kidding. But in that context, if it happens or starts outside of work but carries on into the office, even though they may or may not have a personal relationship, how liable is the employer?
Well, the answer is you better freaking believe they're liable, believe it or not.
No kidding.
And the employers would be very shocked to hear this. So if it's a supervisor, and a supervisor may not be someone that you've assigned to be a supervisor. They just have to be a de facto supervisor, someone that's in a higher position or someone that's managing another person, even though they may not be labeled a manager.
Got it.
If it happens from a supervisor, strict liability. Let's talk about that. What does strict liability means?
Yeah.
It means it doesn't matter if you knew about it. Doesn't matter if you intended it. It doesn't matter if you told them never to do that. You are strictly liable. In other words, you have no defenses, basically. Strict liability is a concept that evolved from ultra hazardous activities, for instance.
Yeah.
So the original concept in the law was if you are, say, using dynamite to mine or demolish a building and something goes wrong and someone gets injured, it doesn't matter how careful you were.
Sure.
It doesn't matter what you intended. You could have done everything by the book and everything right, but it happened. And what the idea was that you're engaged in such an activity that is so inherently dangerous that it doesn't matter. You're just liable for whatever happens.
Wow. And
that concept of strict liability is now applied to discrimination and harassment laws. So getting to your point, and now, we've talked about a few things that could be misinterpreted.
Sure.
What if you have a gentleman who's of Chinese descent that you've hired, and the supervisor constantly sends them smiley faces, and the supervisor means, good job, happy day, great job, I'm happy. And the Chinese worker's taking it as being a sarcastic effer. Why is he being sarcastic? Why is he doing this? And he starts to feel, attacked, and he starts to feel uncomfortable, and the environment starts to feel hostile to him. Well, you might say, well, that's not normal. That's not how normal people would take it. But you have to understand the test for harassment is a reasonable person of that culture, of that race, of that sexual orientation, of that.
Is there?
So whatever that protected class is, it's a reasonable person within that class. So even though you and I might take a smiley face as meaning happy,
Yeah.
and a Chinese gentleman takes it as being sarcastic,
Yeah.
it's his standard.
But shouldn't there also be a reasonable standard of communication where the individual, he, she, they, are made to feel uncomfortable, that they should have notified somebody within the hierarchy of the firm? It could be HR, it could be an individual that's sending them the items.
Not if it's a supervisor.
But isn't that why there is a human resource potential component, or a company should have some level of contact of human resources that is outside of their direct supervisor?
Oh, yeah, you have to have all that stuff. You have to have all that.
But what I'm thinking is,
the fact is that failure to report
Mhm.
is not a defense. If the harassment's happening, the harassment's happening. And the standard, we have to understand the standard has to do with the person. Consider this one. Now, I think it's been around a while, but we have all these, skin color
sure,
that you can put on your emojis, right? Like you could have a darker skin color or a lighter skin color for your thumbs up.
sure.
What if that's perceived as being used sarcastically? For instance, I was told at one point, I'm Mexican descent, so I use a slightly browner one than the pink one.
Okay.
And someone told me that they thought that was too dark, that I was being funny, like making fun of other races because I'm white passing, right?
Sure.
So you got to be careful with that stuff.
So
You could even have issues with, people using a skin tone that's seen as offensive.
So if we're sticking with the professional environment still, because that's really interesting, that if the failure to report, nobody in the organization knows, neither does the person potentially committing this offense knows, the company is still liable.
Yeah.
Then my question is, everyone else is probably thinking, why have employees? Is this why AI is on the rise? That we'll just have a bunch of Optimus 2s, cranking things away, not offending each other?
That's a deeper question, Ken. It's a political question, but I mean, the fact of the matter is, that's what we're dealing with.
Yeah.
So I think my point that I wanted to make in this podcast, and the point I want to make to our clients and anyone listening, is, look, we got to be careful with these things as employers. We should probably have, needs to be part of harassment training, which it's not right now. And, we could get into all our personal opinions about this. And if you got into mine, everyone would probably be deeply offended. But the point of the matter is that that's not my job, is to, pass judgment on whether this is good or bad, or whether politically I want these things, or whether it's good for business. The fact of the matter is, this is what we're dealing with. As employers, we have to be aware of it, and we have to somehow try to mitigate it. And I think that I would love to say my advice to you is forbid all of your employees from using emojis. That ain't going to happen. It's just not going to happen. So there's no point in that.
You start disabling emojis on the computers, leaving cell phones in lock boxes on the way in.
Good luck.
All right. I actually have friends that work in national defense entities, and they can't bring their cell phones into the office, which is to the chagrin of their friends and family or potential spouses that are trying to get in touch with them during the year. So there's a little bit of solace there. Not having your cell phone can be freeing, John. Maybe that's an experiment down the line, but not practical in everyday context. The navigation of emojis, the art of the emoji, in this case, leaves a lot to be under interpretation. I wonder if some of that could be resolved through just open communication and cultural, right? Because there's cultural context.
Yeah.
There's some firms, we talk about tech firms being a lot looser and a lot more free. And then you have professions historically like ours that are known as, collared suit jacket, and I'm really more conservative. And so in that context, right, again, the same actions in an environment where everyone's playing ping pong and drinking from a kombucha fountain in the middle of the courtyard, then maybe it's not the same when someone sends, an emoji. But never, again, like I said, never eggplant or peach.
I still, see but that's really cool that you're saying that, because I swear I have no idea what you're talking about.
I love it. I love
I
it, John.
really don't understand what you're talking
And
about.
even just another throw you for another world when on Urban Dictionary rabbit hole, I came to learn that there's emoji that is of the human brain. Don't send that out either. Just go ahead and
Okay, is this more sexual shit?
it is, but again, that's kind of goes in right into what you said. You talk about harassment in the workplace. That could be context. And for me, when I first thought about it, I was like, "Oh, you're putting your thinking cap
No,
on.
I
You're
mean,
thinking like, good job."
That's a good one,
If
though.
I did brain and I did light bulb, I'd be like, "Good thoughts." Like to me, it'd be like, "Good thoughts." Yeah,
And
that's what
what
that
would that
means.
mean in reality, Kat?
Outside of the workplace, in the we'll call it the dark web of people's minds, the brain is a connotation for fellatio. Exactly.
What?
Yeah.
How is that even possible?
And even I'm putting a scientific spin on that.
But I
Exactly.
don't get it. I
It
mean,
comes from music of the era, and the word brain also the actual the jargon of brain, getting brained. For our listeners out
okay.
there,
See, that's important because now let's think about the fact that you know these things.
yeah,
You're probably laughing at me for not knowing these things. And there's an age difference there, right?
sure,
So clearly an older employee like
Sure.
myself could be sending emojis to a younger employee, potentially a female employee, or, even another male employee. It doesn't really matter these days with something like that.
Yep.
And, they're thinking that I'm, insinuating that we should have some sort of sexual relationship. And I was just thinking, you got a good brain.
Good job, thumbs up,
Good
brain,
Lord.
right? Yeah. So
Good Lord. And but again, to the point,
Mhm.
if that were to happen,
yeah,
the younger employee accepting that as being some sort of sexual advance,
Mhm.
it's them. It's how they felt about it, how they received it,
Mhm.
not what I meant.
Do you know on the
That's
bottom of
key.
do you know
It's
on the
not
bottom
what I
of-
meant.
not what you meant? That doesn't mean that there's not a settlement involved. I wonder if just like some of our emails, at the bottom of our emails, we put these disclaimers. It says, if you receive this in error, this is intended only for the intended party, and at the end of
Yeah.
a commercial, you have all the
Trust me.
small jargon.
That's not going to work.
Can we do that in our contexts, in our text right afterwards? A little disclaimer pops up and it says, if any of these emojis are misinterpreted, please delete. Was not meant to offend. And I'm sorry 1,000 times. Here's a Starbucks gift card. Thank you.
That would probably make it even worse.
So ignorance, maybe
Well,
a
I
defense.
think the other thing that people, I really want our clients to understand
Yeah.
and our listeners to understand too, is they have to understand just how insidious this stuff is.
Mhm.
So you can have an employee that you have a great relationship with that you think would never do something like this or
Sure.
would not try and take advantage, because oftentimes, you're seeing this as trying to take advantage. And maybe in reality, the employee wasn't harassed or didn't feel bad about it or thought it was a
Mhm.
joke. And let me talk to you about an example of that we have in our actual firm. And that's that we had an employee who worked as a driver, and he was black, and he was working with some Asians, right? And they joked around with him a little bit, but it seemed like it was very friendly, and he really didn't seem to take offense to it. But he had an issue with how he was being treated with regard to his routes. And apparently a lot of the other drivers had it. So he had an issue with the company.
Mhm.
He had an issue that he felt that he was being shortchanged. And he had an issue that, he didn't feel like he was making the livelihood that he should because of how he was being treated economically.
I see. So it created a adverse assignment of work.
So, but let's talk about this man. So he goes to, he's probably driving around town.
Sure.
He sees an ad for the billboard lawyers. We've all seen it.
Mhm.
Are you feeling bad at work? Do you feel harassed by your employer, discriminated against, all these things?
Sure.
He goes to the attorney and he didn't say to them, I feel that they're making fun of my skin color. I feel racially discriminated against.
Sure.
That's not what he said. He told the attorney about his issue with the way he was being treated economically, and he felt that his routes were being given to other drivers, and that and it was something apparently that all the drivers and employees had problem with, regardless, irrespective of their you know
Race,
race
color.
or skin color or
Yeah.
national origin or whatever. And what do you suppose the attorney said to him?
That's not going to fly. We're going to have to change that story.
That's right.
Going to create a different
So the
narrative.
employee was, well, we can't do anything about that. But did they ever make fun of you being black?
I see.
And what came up was some apparently remarks that they made that he didn't really take as being
Sure.
right. But
Sure.
then that was used in a lawsuit. And the funny thing, or the moral of the story here too, is turns out the employer was hit with this 100-page complaint, no joke, with 60 causes of action for everything from discrimination to wage and hour claims and not paying overtime and not getting sick time and all these things, 99% of which was not true.
Sure.
And the employee had no idea that he was suing for these things because, in fact, he went back to the employer looking for more work and had no idea this was even going on.
Oh my gosh.
So this guy didn't even know that he was suing the employer with these claims. And when he was eventually confronted with it, he was like, well, none of that happened.
Yeah.
But why would an attorney, I'm not saying this is an ethical firm, but why would they bring such a case? Because it's a shakedown.
Yeah.
Because they know that they can bring this suit and they can, settle it for $25,000 or $30,000 or $50,000, take their VIG, and happy day off to the races. Doesn't matter what the truth was.
Sure.
So all that need happen is that the employee have something they're unhappy about, go to one of these schmucks,
Yeah.
and next thing you know, all the emojis are like, oh, look at what they did.
So it's a tough pill to swallow to think that every employer is basically screwed. What best practices can an employer actually deploy or put into their firm's culture or communications that give them some leg to stand on? Because, again, people are going to be humans, and you can't control everyone's actions, their emotions. Everyone has good days and they have bad days. The concept of control, especially for an employer, is one that a good employer should give up, but one of building a good culture, a place of meaning with purpose and structure can be one. Not to say that makes everyone good, but what can a employer do to not necessarily just protect themselves, but have a best practice? So when this comes up, or if this does come up, they have some ability to protect themselves, because otherwise it's a big deterrent from doing business.
Well, I think a key point, there's two components to it. And let me address the legal one.
Sure.
And I think to your point, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right?
Sure.
So legally, how do we prevent these things? Well, you can't 100%.
Mm-hmm.
First line of defense: employment practices, liability insurance.
Oh.
People don't typically have this. They typically don't have that as part of their policy. They have general liability and they have this and that. Employment practices, liability insurance is going to help. Is it going to 100% protect you? No, because there's a lot of nuances to when it applies and when it doesn't apply. But for God's sakes, at least get the insurance company on the hook for your defense.
Sure.
So you're not spending hundreds of thousands of dollars defending these cases.
Sure.
Big one. Second is training.
Mm-hmm.
It's a joke to a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I had to do my sexual harassment training. Ha, ha, ha.
Mm-hmm.
I went through it and I clicked the buttons and all that. And the problem is most material out there for sexual harassment training is poor.
Mm-hmm.
It's very woke.
Okay.
It doesn't speak to anyone. It's not serious enough to really, it's like, they come up with these silly scenarios and they get into a lot of,
I love the acting on it, though.
Yes,
Monotone.
the acting's terrible.
Monotone acting.
Acting's terrible. It's poorly produced. So finding a good program, though, I think would be key, or even coming up with your own program and incorporating materials like this, keeping up to date with what's going on, but training, right?
Here's an entrepreneurial idea. The videos I love to actually watch. Do you remember old Schoolhouse Rock? I'm just a bill.
There you go.
You know,
Something like that.
if
Yeah.
if someone came out with that, but for the tedium of sexual harassment training or workplace harassment training, first off, reach out to us. We'd love to watch it. We'll highlight it. We'll comment on those because I love
Yeah,
those
send us some
videos.
links if you guys think you see some good, harassment training videos out there that aren't boring and
Yeah.
tedious and woke. I think those would be good, because I think what the people that produce these things don't understand is that if you start incorporating your politics and views into these videos, people turn off.
Yeah. Yeah.
So people that don't agree with you are going to turn off to it, and then the training's ineffective,
Sure.
because the point isn't to scold.
Mm-hmm.
The point isn't to promote a particular agenda. The point should be, look, these are real legal liabilities. This is the state of the law. These are the things you need to be aware of. And I think the key is, and I never see this in the materials,
Mm-hmm.
your intent is irrelevant. It's how the other people take it. So you have to start being emotionally sensitive, right?
All right.
To how, if you send an emoji to someone, or if you're in a meeting with them and you say something, you see that other person's made uncomfortable,
Yeah.
you should explore that with them and find out, did I do something to make you uncomfortable? I didn't mean it. And maybe they'll explain to you, hey, you keep sending me that smiley face emoji, and where I come from, that's sarcastic. And I'm kind of wondering, do you think I suck?
Yeah.
So, and then the person could go, "Gee, man, I didn't mean that. And I will never send that to you again. I'm really sorry." That right there could solve that problem. So it's about emotional intelligence, I think, is a lot
You hit
to
it
do
on the
with
head.
it.
Yep.
But to your point, what would you say in terms of prevention? And I think culture, right? I mean, what you're
Sure.
talking about in terms of culture in your company.
Yeah. I have an out of the box, or we'll call it out of framework thought process. What if? I know there's only so many things you can have disclaimers for. When you go skydiving, you write a disclaimer to write your life away, right? Here's another. This is potentially a legal context. I would love your input. What if everyone that worked for a company went in and said, "Hi, you're going to go, let's say it's a position for an ARAP position in a manufacturing company, but that position is in an employment for ARAP. You walk in and you sign a contract that says, you are an actor. You are going to show up, and in this scene, you will play a person that does ARAP with diligence. And then during that scene, you may have potential harassment that occurs, and you will deal with it in a jovial manner. And you know what? And you might also have workplace harassment, and you might have job schedule harassment where they don't give you the best schedules. But you are acting. This is a acting gig.
So I love
Context.
that. You come up with some really interesting plans.
I mean, isn't that's a loophole that the town of Chatsworth uses, as we all know, for the difference between acting and prostitution,
Well, this is true.
right?
This is true. I don't think that's going to work.
Just
Because one of the reasons, though, this is important, again, to
okay.
understand, because I know a lot of employers are thinking, well, I'll put this clause in my employee handbook, and I'll have them sign this and that and this and that. You can't contract away these rights.
Sure.
You can't sign waivers. I mean, a famous example was, I remember, this was back in the 80s. It was actually a lawyer, since disbarred for this behavior, by the way, where he would hire young ladies
Okay.
as his employees, and he would have them sign waivers that said, I can have sex with you, and I can harass you, this and that, and I can pull your pants down and do basically whatever I want to you. Really serious. I'm not joking. I'm not saying this is hyperbole. This is literally what it said.
Okay.
And he went on to do those things.
Oh boy.
And they all signed waivers that said he could do it. And he was like, well, they signed away. They knew that's what I was going to do. So it was all fine. Well, no, to hell with you. You can't do that. And it had to do with, what we call disparaging and contracting power and that sort of thing. But the guy was, he was disbarred for that.
So just bear with me a moment. Let's say he decided not to be an attorney because he was in the wrong profession. Like I said, he should have been in the adult film industry. So had he been doing that, and say, my role is to be an attorney that sexually harasses people. By the way, there's a subsection category in the deep web on that whole context,
What are you
just as an
doing in the deep
FYI.
web? What are you doing in this deep web, Ken? What are you doing, man?
Research, John. It's
Okay.
research. But it's understanding context.
Don't ever share that with my wife that there's such a thing, or that you even told me of it.
You know, it's interesting. People think that accountants, there's an old adage where to be invisible, you just put on a janitor's suit and no one knows that you're even there. There's been some skits and sitcoms on that. I find that accountants, I may not, have started thousands of businesses on my own. I've started a few, but I get to be the fly on the wall for other people's businesses, and I get to see what they do, how they conduct themselves in some of the most intimate matters, and they bring us in some of the most intimate conversations as well. And they're typically freer because I'm not their lawyer, or I'm not X. I'm just the number guy, right? Sitting in a corner. But I get to see all these things, and I bring all this up because I get to listen. And sometimes I have to put some notes and I have to Google that and be like, I have no idea what he just said. Brain emoji. What is that about? And so I get
That's a really much better explanation than you've been on the dark web. That you learned these things in meetings.
if I'm actually honest, I actually don't know how to get on that.
Good.
Okay.
That's
great.
You should be.
My web addiction are two sites that is of anyone of my, call it age band, is one called Amazon and another one called Zillow.
Yeah, well, you're a big shopper. We know that.
So shopper of dreams.
But I think, the last line of defense that you can do in your company is having a good, positive, non-toxic culture in your company. And I know that's one of the big things we try and do at TACSIS, or I believe we successfully do. And that's it, making employees feel heard and making the employees feel protected. They should feel like you, as their employer, are approachable and that you're willing to protect them. So if they are having a problem, if they are feeling made uncomfortable by a supervisor, they can come and talk to you and will come and talk to you. And that's very difficult.
Yeah.
One of the things I've discovered in our practice and our relations with employees is a lot of employees are afraid of me. And I can't imagine why. I honestly can't. Because I always feel like I'm approachable, but you know what? At the end of the day, you can understand, in their mind, you're the big boss.
Sure.
And in their mind that you hold all this power over their financial future, and you have to be mindful of that.
That's why they say Big John, Big Boss. I'm just kidding. I agree. I agree wholeheartedly with you. And I think that the key factors in that feeling or that sense or that culture that you develop is the tenets are clear communication and accountability. I think those key components of that for individuals internally to have and understand that it's accepted and promoted within an organization, that clear communication, like an example you said, if somebody went to that individual and says, hey, that smiley face means something different in my culture, that's open communication.
Right.
And it also shows accountability, right? And it has that emotional intelligence component that allows that you want to give that opportunity, freedom, and encouragement to every level and strata of your organization, right? Especially in the folks that are the tactical portions of your organization. They may not be in management positions. They may be newer to their career. And especially when we bring in folks that don't come into us fresh, as I call it, uncluttered by other experiences in the working world, they tend to take to that with gusto. But a lot of folks that we find that are experienced come in with, just like everyone else comes into a relationship, with that emotional baggage or that career professional baggage of, man, I was, just like that office space experience where I can't talk to anyone. They're always asking for reports. No one wants to listen to me. And it's hard to have an organization that's, centered around something other than pure profit.
Right. And I'd like to just leave with one thought, especially, again, for our clients and employers out there. Sooner or later, you're going to have someone in your organization who, let's call him Chad.
Mm-hmm.
And Chad's a really good employee because maybe he's a great salesman. Maybe he knows his job really well. And you feel like you can't get along without Chad. because he's got this relationship with your customer. But you also know that Chad's Chad.
Sure.
And he's a jerk. And he makes sexual remarks to your employees, or at least seems like the sort of guy that would. And you keep turning a blind eye to Chad's behavior because I don't know what I'd do without him. I don't know if I can replace him. I don't understand. You just bought yourself a lawsuit, dude. You got to know that. It's going to happen. Get rid of Chad.
That's true.
Just don't have him. I'm sorry. Don't have those guys around. And I guarantee you there's so many employers out there that know who they are. They know who these bad actors are.
Sure.
But they are stuck in this idea that, what am I going to do without him? How would I replace him? How would I find somebody else? Do it.
That's good advice. And you know what? That advice is actually, the next level is best discussed with counsel. And we have a podcast about choosing the right professionals, but having good counsel, having good folks on your team or professional services on your team, that echo chamber or that sounding board gives you fine professional advice on taking action. And I recommend that for all business owners, entrepreneurs, large and small companies. And don't just rely, I hate to say this, just don't rely on maybe sometimes the one HR person you have on staff. It is critical that you find the right professional, typically an employment attorney or an attorney that that has experience in this area, to give that advice. And the little bit you spend for that hour is going to save an entire amount of heartache.
Yep.
So with that, seek good help, as it were. That's all the time we have for today. I'm at the end of my glass. You've been teetotaling this whole time. It's all good. Cheers. Well, till next time, I'm so glad that everyone joined us. If you love what you're hearing, if you have questions, comments, talk to us about different emojis we don't even know about. Give us questions, subscribe, like, email us at podcast@taxis.com. We'd love to hear from all of you.
I would love to hear some comments from our listeners about if they got emojis that they misinterpreted, or how they felt about it, or if they felt harassed, or if there was a situation where they made someone feel uncomfortable because unintentionally sent an emoji. I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, we'd love to hear your stories. All right, like, subscribe, tune in next time. Thanks, everyone.